Good afternoon. This is John Horowitz, President and CEO of Easter Seals DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Thank you for joining us. Our vision is to create a hopeful, inclusive community where all individuals realize their potential and live meaningful lives. During this time of COVID, many children are at risk of not realizing their potential. That's one of the reasons we started our Candid Conversations webinar series and have included topics such as talking to our children about racism and make the first 5 count, keep your child on track by screening for delays and disabilities, among other topics. You can access replays of past webinars on the Easter Seals DC, Maryland, Virginia YouTube. If you'd like to help Easter Seals realize our vision, please email info@eseal.org to get involved. As we prepare for back to school season, today's webinar is vital. We are all concerned about critical issues such as, does virtual learning deliver good results? Will socioeconomic status impact virtual learning outcomes? Is so much screen time harmful? How can I help my child be successful in a remote learning environment? Now I invite you to join the conversation by participating in our poll. While you're answering the poll, I'll remind you that all participants are muted, but you can always ask questions in the Q&A function at any time. Finally, I'm pleased to thank today's panelists, and now to turn the panel over to our moderator, Darnell Burton, Vice President of Development at Easter Seals DC, Maryland, and Virginia. As a dad of 3, Darnell also has a keen interest in today's topic. Darnell?
John, thank you for that. I was in the middle of trying to answer that panel, the questionnaire, but I'll stop and start to introduce all of these wonderful panelists. Hey, first of all, thank you guys for joining us today. As John stated, these Candid Conversations, we were able to quickly pivot to doing the Candid Conversations, not knowing that this would become such a staple in what we're doing here at Easter Seals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. But candidly, our conversations are transitioning across the United States and globally. So we really appreciate you joining us today, and thank you for our fantastic panel. Jumping right in, introducing our first panelist, Dr. Becky Porter. 3 quick bullet points about Ms. Porter, and she told me not to call her Miss, so Becky. Since September of 2019, retired Colonel Becky Porter has been the President and Chief Executive Officer of Military Child Education Coalition. She's a 1983 Distinguished Military Graduate from the University of Washington. She served in the United States military from 1985 to 2019 in many locations, including the Chief of Psychology at Walter Reed Hospital here in the DC area, Bethesda. She holds a Master's of Arts in Counseling Psychology from Chapman University, a PhD in Clinical Psychology from Fielding Graduate University, a Master's in Science from the National Security and Strategic Studies from the National War College, and she is a board-certified clinical psychologist. Wow, that's a lot of degrees. I am jealous. Dr. Bweikia Steen. Did I say that right, Bweikia? Yes? No? Okay.
Yes, you did.
She's an associate professor of education at George Mason University. She's previously taught at Trinity University as an associate professor and the director of early childhood programs. She received her doctorate from the University of San Francisco in international and multicultural education. Her research interests are promoting social, emotional, and academic excellence among children of color and children of poverty during the early years. Thank you for being here, Bweikia. Dr. Glenn Whitman, he's the director and founder of the Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning at St. Andrew's Episcopal School and history teacher at St. Andrew's Episcopal School. He's the co-author of Neurotech, Brain Science and the Future of Education and Assessment and Learning the Brain, What the Research Tells Us. He earned his MALS from Dartmouth University, his BS from Dickinson College. He presents at public, private, and international school conferences worldwide. And most recently, his publication, Every Educator Needs to Know How the Brain Learns and How Brain Research Helped Retool Our School Schedule for Remote Learning. Last but not least, our surprise guest, because I brought her at 12 o'clock this morning and said, we need you to join, is Ms. Tyritia Groves. She's the current principal of KIPP Academy Elementary School in South Bronx, New York. Mid-year, she would transition into the Senior Director of School Culture Coaching for KIPP's network of public charter schools nationally. She has been a special education coordinator, a teacher, a principal across traditional school districts, as well as uncommon schools, and the KIPP NYC Public Schools. She received her master's in education from Pace University. And last but not least, Tyritia has coached and mentored a number of aspiring and current school leaders. So I guess we'll start with Tyritia since you were last but not least. Tyritia, here we offer you an opportunity to give us 3 to 5 minutes about yourself. Let me back up. For the people joining us today, the way that this webinar usually works is we spend the first 3 to 5 minutes actually introducing each of the people on the panel. And then after that, we'll start to ask individual questions of the panelists, but we hope this is more of an engaged seminar. We would also ask that if you have questions, please, there's a Q&A box down below, or there's a chat box. Once these folks start to chime in, please feel free to send questions specifically towards the panelists who you'd like to, ask that question to, or ask it to the total group. So again, thank you guys for joining us. I'm glad to see that we're, kind of trending up here with our participation numbers, and I'll turn this over to Ms. Gross. Please spend some time introducing yourself, what you're doing now, and why this topic of, virtual education is important to you, specific with your population.
Sure. As Darnell said, he's lucky he is him. He is he, just because I am currently running my school virtually. As he said, I am the current principal of KIPP Academy Elementary School in the South Bronx. I'm going into my 6th year of leadership. Prior to that, I've been in the school 9 years. And so I was also the NAP, I was also a dean, I was also a teacher before that Uncommon. Then I've also worked for the Department of Education for 6 years as well. And so I'm going into my 17th year in education, and I love it. I can't imagine myself being anywhere else but there. As Darnell said, I am transitioning though out of school leadership into a more of a consulting role for the KIPP network, where I'll be the senior director of school culture coaching, going to different schools and helping develop different school leaders, developing teachers, and just helping people to develop strong school cultures. And this virtual learning, let me tell you, it has been an experience. So back on March 13th is when my superintendent called and basically said, Tyritia, schools we're closing. We have to close. That was at 11:17. I'll never forget. It was 11:17 a.m. And so between 11:17 a.m. and 4:15 p.m. when school closed, we had to make sure students had Chromebooks. We had to make sure that they had their workbooks that they needed to take home. We only thought we were going to be out for a couple weeks. We thought we were going to be out until April 17th. So we did not pack up the school. And so we just sent them with enough work for about 2 weeks. Then April 1st came and we got another call and said, we're pushing it back until May. And we said, oh, okay. So how are we going to get work to children? So we quickly had to dive into Google Classrooms like most people did. We were figuring out, I tell my staff all the time, I tell my families all the time, we are literally flying the plane and building it at the same time. We did not know what we were doing, but at the same time, we knew that it was important that our kids stay engaged. We knew that it was important that our kids continue learning and continue forging forward. And so we were going to figure it out. And we did. We made plenty of mistakes, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And we learned from those mistakes. We pretty much worked throughout the summer, making sure that we were vetting different platforms, making sure that we took 1 billion surveys from our families, from kids. But it has been a journey, right? I teach elementary school, and so I have young ones, and it's very difficult to teach a 5-year-old how to read virtually. It's very difficult to teach a 5-year-old how to socialize, right? Those are the things that they need at this time. And at the same time, a lot of people tend to forget, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, it's the foundation. It actually is, if that foundation is cracked, forget it. You're going to be struggling forever. And so it has definitely been a challenge for us. However, we are working through it. We're working with our families, and we can get a little bit more into some of the things that, we've been doing, some of the things that we realized worked, some of the things that we realized didn't work. I think ultimately, though, if I had to put a ribbon on all of, virtual learning and the success of it, is we have really, really more than ever had to really forge a partnership with families, because it's no longer you drop your child off to school and you guys take them. And it's really about, everybody has this seat at the table, and everybody has to make sure that children are learning and children are logging on and teaching them how to learn. But we also have understood that parents are also working from home. I live in New York City. We were the epicenter. And so we also had a number of our parents that had COVID. We had a number of our families that were struck with, losing a family member or losing multiple family members. I have families that lost like 5 or 6 people to COVID. And so also dealing with the social, emotional, and just the trauma that our kids are going through. And also the fact that, I work in one of the most underserved communities in the country. And so the resources were very low. We literally cleaned our school out and gave all of our sanitizer, gloves, masks, everything to the local hospital because they didn't have it. And our entire network did it. And so it's been challenging. But at the same time, as much as we want them in school, we also want them to be safe. And we also want our staff to be safe. And we also want our families to be safe. And so I'm an advocate of, we're going to figure this out. And we're going to make sure that our kids are going to learn, or they're going to move forward. But at the same time, we're going to do it safely.
Arisha, I really appreciate that. And what a heck of an introduction. And, piggybacking off something you said, talking about the mental health piece of this. Becky, I want to come to you. And because of your background, can you kind of, again, as you were describing yourself, also spend some time talking about the mental health aspect of this? Because I think that that's a crucial component, not just about, where we are from an education perspective, and from the child perspective, but can you talk about what you know about the parent perspective as well?
Sure. Thanks, Darnell, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. It might seem kind of strange to some people to have a clinical psychologist to be the head of a nonprofit that serves the educational needs of military children. But I think the people on this webinar and probably in the audience realize that if you don't have the social emotional foundation, you're not ready and able to receive what's put in front of you from an educational standpoint. And so there is a real natural partnering between education and the psychological needs or emotional needs of children or students in general. For military students, they have a lot of the same stressors right now that Tyritia was talking about with regard to ill family members or just being socially isolated from their classmates. For military kids, there can be additional stressors as well. For example, about 1/3 of military students will move every summer. And so I think of it from the standpoint of, we ended the last school year in, an upheaval where schools were responding and going virtual as much as they could. And then for some military kids, they leave from that kind of a setting, and then they go during the summer or maybe early into the fall to another setting that is similarly atypical, if you want to put it that way. And so, and then the parents are trying to coordinate with the school that's sending them and the school that is receiving the students. And so it's, for everybody, these are difficult times. I think when you think about the psychological aspects of it, some things that we can do for students, and MCEC, Military Child Education Coalition, deals mostly in K through 12. So when I think of students, I also think children. It's synonymous. What we as educators and parents can do for those students is to provide some sense of routine and so a schedule. Even if if they're sitting at home for that schedule, you want to set that up. You want to set up an opportunity for them to get some exercise during the day. You have a place for them in your apartment or in your house, if possible, that is their learning environment. So that they know when they sit down there, just like for those of us working from home, when you're sitting there, you're working. When you're sitting in that place for school, you're learning. And so, I mean, those are just some of the basic tips, but to also, I think from a psychological standpoint, get not only students, but your friends thinking about the future, thinking about, that builds resilience to consider, when I look back at this time, what will I tell my children about the way that my family got through COVID? Or what will I tell my children about how I went to school during this time? and trying to move yourself mentally into the future helps it so that you don't feel so hopeless right now, if that makes sense. I think I'll stop there and let some other folks.
Look, I was paying so much attention, I lost track of time, right? So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much,
Sure.
Becky. Becky, I'm going to pivot from you and go to Glenn. I think all of these are kind of building on one another. Glenn, you do a lot with the neuroscience portion of the study, the brain. So I think, coming from the psychological to your side of the fence, we'd love to hear, a little bit more about you and in your study as it pertains particularly to the virtual learning space.
Awesome. Thanks, Darnell, and love being part of this illustrious group. My name's Glenn Whitman. My perspective might be just a little different than the team here in that I'm actually an active classroom teacher. I still teach 10th grade history at a school just outside of Washington, D.C. I've taught anything from 6th to 12th grade. And at the school, we have a unique element to the school. About a decade ago, we decided that the greatest irony in education is that our teachers didn't know enough about how the brain learns, works, and thrives. And so I grew up in New Jersey, so here's my little snarky moment here, right? I think there's only one educational truth. And push back, but do it in the chat. Every kid will have his, her, or their, depending on how they identify as brain, whenever they go to learn, whether it's in person, whether it's virtual. So shouldn't every educator, school leader, know the science behind learning? So the challenge is that's not a truism, right? As a matter of fact, I think it's one of the great educational malpractices. From the research our Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning does, about 20% of teachers in a self-reported survey, so researchers out there, some people are lying, we get it, have foundational and accurate knowledge of the science behind how the brain learns. So for parents in the audience, for teachers in the audience, school principals, imagine if there was a way to get all educators in sort of that space. So that was the challenge we first solved for our teachers. And now what we've been doing is looking at the most promising research and strategies in educational neuroscience and organizing that in teacher-friendly ways, because our whole team still teaches, and to see if we can bring it to scale, whether it's to KIPP schools in Brooklyn or around the world, or God, I would love to imagine if every U.S. military family ed teacher had this lens around stress and trauma. God, we would be serving kids so much better. And it even goes to, I don't want to lose sight of knowledge. We want our youngest learners to our oldest learners to be learning stuff. And we know how critically important and where gaps we have to think about in terms of vocabulary and literacy and maths, especially on the early learners, is really somewhat at risk in this distance learning experience. So we can talk more about this, but essentially is, we think we figured out one way with great support to bring this work and research in how the brain learns to teachers at scale. And we just look forward to trying to figure it out with communities who can then use that research in their context with their kids. So that's my little story. I'll pass it back. And I hope everybody knows we're now friends, so you're stuck with us. So let's start.
Glenn, that's not a little story. Actually, again, that is a unique way of thinking about this. And you can't see well, you can, but Tyritia, Bweikia, and Becky were all like, I guess that is a really important topic to talk about. So Bweikia, last but not least, definitely. And again, I think this is building on your space is higher education, specifically the college ranks, right? And so again, hearing what everybody else has said, I would love for you again to talk a little bit about who you are, but talk about, your lens as you're talking about this virtual space. And I'll share a personal piece. I just dropped my daughter off at college and they're going online. Yay, yes, out of the house. At least one is out, right? So they're now going to this, this virtual piece for the first 3 or 4 weeks, and then they're going to transition to this hybrid model. So I'd love to hear what you have to say and share a little bit about your thoughts there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Bweikia Steen. I'm an associate professor at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. And everything, you're right, you just really set up the stage. Everything that you're talking about, that all of the panelists have spoken about, those are topics that we try to model, expose our teacher candidates to, you know, at the higher ed level. So a little bit about myself. I'm a mother. I have two daughters. One is going into the 2nd grade and one is going into the 4th grade. So I always joke now, because early childhood is birth to 3rd grade, and now I have a 4th grader. I don't know what to do with her now. I'm like, I need somebody else to teach her. But I'm joking. Please don't tell her that. But prior to being in higher ed, I was an early childhood educator. I worked with infants, toddlers, pre-K. I taught kinder, 1st, 2nd, and I even taught 3rd for like summer school one summer. So I don't really always tell people I taught 3rd grade. So I have the experience of being in the classroom as an educator. And being in the classroom was actually my impetus for receiving my doctorate, because while I was an educator, I saw the inequities that a lot of our children of color were experiencing, and I wanted to do something about it. So that's why I, you know, decided to pursue my doctoral degree. So now I'm an associate professor. I work with undergrad and grad students, teacher candidates who are receiving their degree in early childhood education. And right now, when you're talking about the virtual space, right now, I'm sure you've all heard that higher ed is in the news, right? We are in the news because how dare we be virtual? But I think that what we want, you know, everyone to understand is, just like for our early childhood young students, we want to keep everyone safe. And so that is why we are virtual. That's why it's a hybrid format, like you were talking about, Darnell. There are a lot of different formats that are happening to keep our students safe. One of the things that we are working with or thinking about as early childhood faculty is how to meet the needs of our students right now at this present time. So that, you know, we're thinking about mental health, like Becky talked about. We're thinking about how the brain learns and what does the brain need right now in order to learn in a virtual space, as well as how then do we take that knowledge and model that for our candidates so that then they go out into the schools and actually then implement what they've learned successfully and effectively. So these are all things that we're thinking about in higher ed and in our early childhood faculty.
Bweikia, I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I didn't do that on purpose. I look like a smart guy today. But I will tell you, the building was fantastic, starting with Becky and moving down the process. So look, guys, at 2:25, we're going to close the poll. So if you haven't answered, please jump in now. But in the interim, I want to jump right in, and this is a Bweikia, Tyritia, but Glenn this is a Becky and Tyritia question. But Glenn and Bweikia, please don't feel like I've slided. Please jump in if you feel the need to. This goes around, you know, really this COVID, the moving of families, the disparity of education. And so this was pointed at Becky. How has COVID impacted families that are relocating, and has virtual learning been integrated into the process? And I mentioned Tyritia because I think you have a transient population with a lot of the brown and black population that you serve there it's the Bronx, right? Up in New York City. And so whether it's a transient or it's a migrant population or English as a second learner, I think you and Becky have similar populations you're serving, just a little bit of a bifurcation and kind of maybe the word that one is, you know, migrant, one is military. So if you guys would talk to that, Becky or Tyritia, I'd really appreciate that. And then Glenn and Bweikia, please jump in.
Thanks, Darnell. And I'll just start by saying that that I'm probably not alone in seeing that in some ways the virtual learning environment has been helpful. And I say that in the sense that for military families, as they're moving from one school to another, we've had the experience of some schools that are that let's say the family is leaving and the school is conducting classes virtually right now, they are allowing the students to stay enrolled at their school and take classes virtually, even as the family is moving to another state and maybe hasn't had an opportunity to get into where they're going to be living and get enrolled in whatever the school is where they're going to. And so we found that there's actually a little bit greater flexibility in some cases than maybe we had before for military kids. I was listening to Bweikia talk about the students that she has who are going to be teachers themselves, and was thinking about a situation that a lot of military families are in, where if they're moving, they don't have the typical family supports around them that maybe somebody who's grown up in a certain community has. In my own family, for instance, my husband went to California for a couple of weeks to stay with our granddaughter while her mom went back to work. And this comes back to Bweikia when thinking about, my husband said, I was watching this third grade teacher try and teach all these third graders who were on their tablets. And he said, if you think your Zoom meetings are tough, you try to get 25 third graders to go on mute.
Tyritia, make sure you answer that when we get to that part, all right? So
and so, I mean, the patience of teachers, I think it's important for what the parents to remember that the teachers are trying to go through this learning process too, and to see what they're doing with regard to being able to not only teach the lesson, but teach it in a virtual format is just amazing. It's an opportunity, I think, for us all to give a little grace to everyone, to see, everybody's going through something tough right now. And so military families, yep, but there are some things about the virtual environment that are working to our advantage, like I just mentioned. And then I'll ask Tyritia to jump in, so I'm not taking all the time.
Well, it was funny because I was laughing when you were talking about one teacher trying to teach 20, and we have 30 to 32 children. So last year was interesting to watch. But I do think some of the things that we've put into place, we learned our lesson. And so in our school, we actually have 2 teachers per classroom. So all of our classes are now broken up into pods. And so it's actually 1 teacher to 15 kids, which has made the world of difference so far. We've only been to school 2 weeks, 1 week. Oh my goodness, it feels like 3. But we've only been to school for 1 week, but it's making a difference. But I do think that ultimately with virtual learning, it is truly, it's kind of a catch-22, right? It's helpful in some situations and it's more harmful in others. And so when I think about our students in particular, they're fortunate, right? We had the opportunity and the resources to be able to give them each, well, last year we gave each family 1 laptop because we didn't have enough, or a Chromebook because we didn't have enough. We've mailed out Chromebooks to every student, but we also know that not every school has the resources to do that. I work in New York City, as I said. Some of those schools are like older than when Jesus was a baby. They are old. And so getting them up to code and making sure that they have the right air ventilation and making sure that they have the amount of PPE they need. And also in New York City, like many other cities, our schools are co-located. So there's 1,750 schools in New York City, but that's the buildings. And so if you think about it, my school in particular, there are 5 high schools in my school and then our elementary school. They look out for us though. They're good to the babies. And so I do think that it has been hard for some of our families where English is a second language. My school is 49% African-American and 51% Latinx. And of our African-American, about 50% of them are West African. And so we are fortunate enough that from the beginning of time, we translate everything into Spanish and French. However, However, that doesn't always fix the situation, right? We also realize that, you know, our families struggle with Wi-Fi because Wi-Fi is not great in the South Bronx, and nobody is rushing out to fix it for the Black and brown families in the South Bronx. But they're making sure that Upper East Side has it. And so, you know, we had to equip them with like MiFis, and so virtual learning has been great in the sense that we all know that kids learn well in smaller groups. And so we are finally at a place where we can take them in smaller groups, and we are having a ton of, so their guided reading and things like that is all one-on-one. And so they are getting great instruction in the sense that they're getting this one-on-one attention from their teachers. But at the same time, the teachers are extremely tired because think about doing a lesson over and over and over again 15 times on the telephone, it becomes a little bit much. We also have virtual classrooms on our Zoom. And so, you know, we had a ton of families that struggled just figuring out how to log on. Zoom had a worldwide crash on Monday. Guess when our first day of school was? Monday. So we had families calling us because, you know, it was asking for passwords. And so what we've done these first 2 weeks, we usually dedicate to systems and routines in our school. We've dedicated it completely to how do you navigate this technology? That's it. There's no academics, there's nothing. Monday was how do you turn on your Chromebook? Right? Then it was...
Tyritia, I gotta jump in here. I'm not trying to steal your thunder. You are talking about some big topics. Just for some housekeeping tips, we're about to share the poll. And then I'd like to do this in the kind of I would like to share the poll first. If we could do that now, team, that would be great. Then Glenn, I'd like for you to talk about what you was talking about, the neuroscience behind this, the feeling of, you know, what's going on in the heads of the teachers, of the students right now as they're doing this virtual piece. And then Bweikia, I'd love for you to kind of piggyback off Glenn and talk about, well, what am I teaching the teachers that are learning now to handle all the things that Becky, Tyritia, Glenn have talked about, right? So let's answer this poll real quick. Did your child's school successfully pivot to virtual? Partially was the big answer at 39%. You see kind of this bridging, 39 and 21 at the yes and the no. What was the next question here? Is your home equipped with Wi-Fi? Yes, we have computers for each child, so 55%. So we obviously have an audience that has a little bit more than I would say probably the norm. And then you see somewhat, you know, we have a family computer and Wi-Fi, and parents are able to share and work remotely. So it's 55 and 36%. And then we have the no, 9%, which was a bigger number than I thought we would get, right? And then the last question here is, the next to last, how concerned are you about potential drop-off in your child's education from 1 to 5? Big answer was 4. We see 3, 4, and 5, 24%, 30%, and 27%. And then lastly, what academic level is your child? We have a big spread here, all the way from early education up to college. So I want to pause here before we go to Glenn to talk about what we were just talking about. Did you guys want to address any of these poll topics as a group? Glenn, Tyritia, Bweikia, or Becky? If not, we can go on and continue to kind of talk about what we were talking about from the virtual space. I'll leave that to you guys to discuss. Glenn, go ahead. You came off. It's your turn.
I just had a happy finger, I think. I don't know what got me there. Look, a couple things. One is very few parents and very few teachers signed up for this, right? I mean, unless you were a homeschool parent before COVID, not many of the parents want to become a homeschool teachers, right? And we know the younger the child, the more pressure and demand it puts on the family. We get it. And teachers, look, we want to see our kids in person, live, give them appropriate positive reinforcement. That said, we're partners, as been pointed out by the panel. And I would still argue, I think in terms of what is promising research from as you noted, I actually say educational neuroscience. I'll never just say neuroscience alone, because in reality, the amount of neuroscience that can be applied to teaching and learning right now is still small. But the most important thing is about neuroplasticity. And that's the lifelong ability of a brain to change. So as we think about the kids coming back to us, and unfortunately too many are still coming back virtually, we get it. I would love us as parents and educators to think about growth, not gaps. Like, let's not get and again, there'll be a great conversation with people about this. There are gaps, I get it. But let's get like a baseline of where kids are socially, emotionally, academically, when we get them back into our environments, and work from there, as opposed to trying to make up 5-6 months. Because when you try to do the latter, when you try to gaps, the research is pretty clear. It creates cognitive overload for the student and the parents and the family or the guardian. So I would caution us to focus on growth over gaps. They're not mutually exclusive, but it's just a mindset that I would throw out there. The other thing around neuroscience and neuroanatomy, and it was addressed by the group, I would argue there's a certain amount of neuroanatomy old teachers should be refreshed on. Like every teacher should know about the limbic system and the amygdala, right? This is the emotional traffic cop of our brain. And I know Becky and we're all shaking our heads, right? I didn't know what the heck an amygdala was until about a decade ago. I'll just go on record. But we know.
You just gave me a new word. Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to challenge you to spell it later, my friend.
No.
But again, we know emotions matter in learning. We know if kids are have good stress versus negative stress or toxic stress, which probably Becky's work, she could educate me on this all day. That's dangerous. So how do you get positive stress? It still comes down to relationships. How do you build virtual relationships with our kids is one of the biggest challenges us teachers are facing. So from the neuroscience lens, I would think parents, caregivers, teachers, school leaders, think about the concept of neuroplasticity, think about growth over gaps, and still think about, which I bet you Tyritia and everybody else is focusing on the first couple weeks, building positive relationships so the deep learning, the challenging work we want kids to be doing can be done in a safe and trusting way. I will get off my soapbox and
hey Glenn, that's a good soapbox. Just don't fall because it's slippery up there, right? So it's a good soapbox. Bweikia, I'd love for you to. Thanks, Glenn. I'd love for you to, and I'm pointing up because you're right above me, Glenn, on the screen. But I'd love for you to talk about being the teacher of teachers and really working with the environment that you're in the higher education. Kind of encapsulate this conversation, this question, with your thoughts on what everybody's shared here.
Yeah, I love being last. I just want you to know, because it really does help to tie everything together. And Glenn, what you just said about the amygdala, and it's so important. And within the first couple of weeks, our fall semester just started Monday, and I teach. One of the major courses that I teach is a curriculum course, and I don't even start talking about how to write a lesson plan until we talk about multiple intelligences, brain research, and the importance of getting to know each child and their family. One of the things you said is that emotion, you talked about emotion, and I love, I have like this visual that I always share with my students, that emotion drives attention. So if the students feel like you are connected with them, they feel like you care about them, then they will actually pay attention. And then that attention then drives learning. So emotion is number one, developing relationships. So that's something that we talk about with our students. My research also deals with family engagement and talking to families, and that is my number one priority when meeting the needs of teacher candidates, is talking to them about how do you connect not only with the students, but with their families. And I love what you said about what KIPP does the first couple of weeks. What I found by dialoguing with families over the past 6 months, and families reaching out, because I'm the internship coordinator, so they want to have tutors, and they're creating pods and all of these things, and they want George Mason students. And so what I found is that really the first step for meeting the needs of families who don't know how to advocate for their children, the families who are asking, who have questions but don't know how to ask them, don't know where to look, is that really it is, if you're going to give them a computer, then you need to talk about how do you use the computer. If you're going to give them a MiFi, how do you turn on the MiFi? What do you do with this I have mine right here. Like, what do you do with it, right? And so, really breaking down steps without judging is what I try to work with my teacher candidates about, because we as educators know how to meet the needs of our babies. My babies are well taken care of, okay? They're privileged. And that is not financially well taken care of. It's because I have a background knowledge in education. So I don't have to have a pod. But I say that not to brag. I say that because not every family is like mine, right? And not every family is like this panel where we know, okay, you need a designated area if you can, because not every family can have a designated area. So just providing, I say all that to say, number one is providing the resources and sharing how to use those resources. That's the number one strategy I found by talking to families over the 6 months of what they need. I just talked to my cousin yesterday, and she was saying she has 4 daughters, and they're all on Zoom at the same time. And I think sometimes we don't think about 4 kids. I think in our brains we think about 1 or 2 as educators, but what happens if a family has 4?
So Bweikia, let me jump in there. I want to share something that happened today. Many of you who've been on our panels before and noticed that my background is significantly different. I shared this with you guys, but I'll share with the audience. I have 2 sons that are doing this. And so my wife and I said, we need to up the speeds because I'm working, she's working. They came and cut my speed off 45 minutes before this webinar, right? And so what if that happens in school? Yeah. I was fortunate where I had somewhere else to go, or I could have used my phone as a hotspot. But, what does that look like if you're in a rural community, or Becky, if you're in a military community, or Tyritia, you're in the South Bronx, right? And so what does that look like in those areas? Bweikia, I want to come back to you, give you a few more moments, but then I want to ask a question to the rest of the group.
Right. And I think that, what I'm trying to get at is that it is so important during this virtual time to talk to the families. And that's something that we're trying to teach our teacher candidates and instill in them. Ask the families, what do they need? We can't just assume that we know, like, oh, well, they need this. My cousin had to figure out where should she go, and a teacher told her to contact the Board of Education, and the Board of Education gave her a free MiFi. I mean, so it's like, but how many families know that that is something that you can do, right? And so asking families, dialoguing with families, providing the resources that they need, and then sharing how to use those resources in a friendly way without making assumptions is something that we're trying to work with our teacher candidates on during this time.
So I will tell you, from all the panels I've done the ones on race and military, I'm paying attention. So I have to apologize that I haven't stopped you. Normally I'm like, hey guys, time check, but we're not gonna do that. But today, time check is 2:41, which means we have 20 minutes left. I want to offer the audience an opportunity to send your questions in now. We've had a few, we've been answering those. So thank you very, very, very much. Glenn, thank you for sharing. Tyritia or Bweikia or Becky, if you'd like to share links in the chat box, you're more than welcome to do that. Again, I want to offer this opportunity as a pause moment to say, please, audience, please ask your questions and chime in. I think this topic is crucially important. I know it's personally important to me. But with that, here's the questions for everybody in the panel, and I'm not going to call any names. One of the biggest concerns we as a nation face is that many families do not have the financial means or access to individual computers, right? What resources, alternatives, or suggestions can you recommend to these families? And Bweikia, you started talking about this a little bit, and Tyritia and Becky and Glenn, you've all mentioned this, but what can we do? And I think this is a couple tiered question. Some of this is we're remote learning and we're moving. Some of this is obviously fiscal related. Some of this is color and racist related. And some of this is we just don't know, right? So again, how do you guys think that we start to offer what resources, alternative, or suggestions would you guys recommend to teachers, families, parents, anybody? And go.
Darnell, thanks. If I could jump in, it's funny because I was thinking about this question right before you asked it. And for any of the folks who are, that's right. any of the folks who are on here that are affiliated with the military, there are, each of the services has a foundation that makes loans available, or in some cases grants available to families, whether it's Army Emergency Relief or Fleet and Family Support. And if you, let's say that you're in a situation where you need to increase your internet speed, that might be something that they would be willing to give you a grant for during these times. And I think that, you know, it's easy to, I mean, traditionally you think of, oh, if I have car repairs that I can't afford, then I go to this service. But right now it could be something like a MiFi, or it could be increasing your internet speed. We've worked with some school systems that put hotspots on their school buses and then drive their school buses to, you know, where different neighborhoods that need additional Wi-Fi capability. But anyway, I'll stop right there and see who else has suggestions. But that's just something from a military standpoint that may be available to people.
I think from the resource, our center's not, we can't really help out much with the Wi-Fi. And, you know, certainly I love that corporations and companies have stepped up. I worry about that sustainability. They were generous early. This is where federal government, state government, you know, come on, help us, help people out. We know if we've learned anything, schools are critically important for the functioning of a healthy country.
Glenn, you're about to make this a political discussion. Let me pause. No, I'm joking. I'm just pausing.
Certainly, teachers are, you know, we do work around the globe. I love seeing, you know, some countries are going from high tech to low tech. They're using radio, they're using TV channels. Again, those might be maybe better options than thinking about the technology. From where we try to help out, though, is resources to give parents some sense of what they can do from the teacher lens, or even school. So I threw two things in the chat that might be relevant. One is we just released a blog around tips for parents, as well as our top 10 tips for teachers. Share them liberally, comment on them, give us better advice. But we feel we can help parents think about how to support their child learners when they're actually in front of them as a resource as well, in addition to getting them connected.
Thanks, Glenn. Tyritia, Bweikia?
I think to touch on what, like, I'm going to say it right, Bweikia said. I'm actually going to call you doctor because you've earned and deserved that. Dr. Bweikia said. I think parents a lot of times, especially, I've only ever worked in urban settings. And a lot of times parents don't understand the power that they have. They don't understand that ask for what you want, because guess what, in the suburbs, if a parent wants something, they go to the school and they sit in the school and they petition, and they're in every school board meeting and they're fighting for exactly what they need for their children. And the fact of the matter is that can happen no matter where you are. Parents have the power. Parents their voices are so much stronger than what they believe. It's just nobody tells them, right? And so I would say one of the biggest things is ask. Right? There are a lot of parents who told us, listen, we are done. We can't deal with this computer. I don't know what to tell you. I can't sit here with my 5-year-old and fill out all these things and try to get them typing. And we said, okay, we got you, right? And so some of the things we did is, we printed out packets and sent it to parents. Or we developed projects. These are projects that they'll do over a span of period of time. Just take a picture of it over your phone and send it to your teacher, and we'll grade it that way. And so I think my biggest thing is you don't know what you can't have until you ask for it. And so really pushing parents to call the school, and if they don't get what they, and I'm saying this as a principal, so I get it, because I get all the drama comes to me. But if you don't get it, then, call the regional office, or, but there are so many resources that schools have, and that so many avenues of support that parents can get, but it's just not always known to them. And so my biggest push for parents is call, ask, and really just be forceful about it, right? These are your children. You advocate for your children. That is your job, to advocate for your child. And I tell parents that all the time. That is your job. I'm never going to be mad at you. But I think that for me, that is the biggest piece around, especially families in the inner cities.
Yes, that is awesome. And that is, I think, families of color, we have to ask. And that is the number one. If we don't ask, we're not going to get. And so I think oftentimes we just don't know that it's okay to ask. And so we don't ask, or we're scared, or we had bad issues or bad experiences ourselves. So it's, there's that fear of approaching the principal, but it's very important to ask. One of the things that I always try to think about and talk to the teacher candidates about are free resources for families, and especially free resources where, since they're on the computer so much, free resources where they don't need to necessarily use the computer, because for early childhood, it's not necessarily developmentally appropriate to be on the computer for 4 hours, right? I still keep in touch with some of my colleagues from my previous, when I was an educator, a teacher educator in California, and they were telling me, like, students are coming to virtual school in pajamas or in the bed. And I'm like, well, I mean, they're 4, so it makes sense. They're at their house. I can understand. But when I say free resources, I mean something as simple as just sharing with families, talking. Like, talk to your child, ask them about their day, even if it's not until bedtime. Forcing yourself to say, what was your favorite part about your day? Singing, we love to sing and dance in my family. So, singing and dancing, those are actually promoting oral language development, which means like their own ability to talk. So, there's free things that you can do. There's go fish, just buying cards from the dollar store, playing cards and playing that old school game, Go Fish. That's wow. Math. It's oral language and it's math in one thing. Do you have a 7? Yes, I have a 7. Okay, great. You just talked, and I'm asking to make sure you know your numbers, right? I said dancing, playing music, playing dress up, reading books. And, the thing is when you get into the kinder, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade of early childhood, remember, I know that this is a wide audience, but my focus is early childhood. I love magazines. So when you go to the grocery store and you see those teeny bopper magazines, listen, it is okay if your child looks at that and says, there's Sophia Carson from Descendants. Well, so you like Sophia? Let's grab this book, this magazine, because why? That's promoting reading. So, so really thinking outside of the box is what I promote for meeting the needs of the families we serve.
Bweikia, I appreciate that, because I will tell you something funny. My team pinged me and said, you need to ask them questions about thinking outside of the computer space, right? So how timely is it that you talked about that? We are 9 minutes out from being done. There are 2 big questions I would like to ask and leave us maybe 2 or 3 minutes at the end. I'd first like to thank the folks that have stayed and have asked the questions. Our panelists have been fantastic answering, as well as our back end. And again, I want to thank the panelists for being here. You guys have provided some excellent information. And again, this will be recorded. This is being recorded and will be shared for anybody that wants to share it from here. Here's a tough one. Yesterday, the NBA walked out, right? They quit. Kids nowadays, I have a 7-year-old who told me, hey, they're not going to play ball today. I'm like, how do you know that? He said, it came across my Switch, my Nintendo Switch. Glenn, I'm looking at you. You're over to my left now instead of up above me. But I want everybody to chime in. How are you guys handling this virtual environment and all of the social problems, racial equity, political questions, people being shot, all those things? How is that playing into your classrooms? And how are you guys handling that?
I'll give you one from the research side. So we're big fans of a group out in California called the Mindset Scholars Network. And the Mindset Scholars Network talks about 3 very well-researched mindsets. Certainly we've heard about growth mindset, and there's been good research behind it, and it's been hard to replicate in many instances. I want to put that one aside for a second and just talk about the 2 other mindsets that I think are actually more important. One is the belonging mindset. If a kid doesn't feel like he, she, or they belong in a school, and their identity is being validated, not threatened, and they're being heard and safe, learning is not going to happen. So I would say getting up to speed a little around the research around belonging mindset, I would put on the front burner. The other mindset related to current events, and we are at a historic time. I'm a history teacher, right? Still, I forget any curriculum I wanted to teach. My curriculum is being done every day by me.
It is.
But there's another mindset called purpose and relevance mindset. And, you know, kids, when it's age appropriate, want to talk about what's going on in the world. And it's a hook. So many of my students, female, male, however they identify, if I had school today, we don't start for another week, I should drop what I'm doing and focus on the last 24 hours of current events. And I would just say, think about those two mindsets as we think about current events, belonging mindset and purpose and relevance mindset. And if you want more information, I'll put the Mindset Scholars Network in the chat.
Hey guys, please, everybody chime in on this one. Give us about a 1 minute answer, and then we want to wrap us up. Thank you. Thank you very much, Glenn. Go ahead. Anybody want to take? Yeah, go ahead.
I can jump in just really quickly. I think when you think about what's going on, I teach I'm in New York City, right? So the pandemic, we were the epicenter for a very long time. There was no getting away from talking about it. My school is all children of color. And so my biggest thing is can't hide from it. And so in kindergarten, we talk about Black Lives Matter movement. We talk about their history. We talk about where they've come from. We talk about the injustices that happen in this country, because my kids walk past police doing what has now been televised every day, right? This is a part of their lives. These things have happened to their families. These things have happened to their brothers and their sisters and their aunts and their uncles. And so I think in my position, we talk about it. We're not going to hide from it. We're going to talk about it. And then more importantly, with teachers, I'm adamant about you listen to children, right? They have a voice. And we're not going to live in a society of I'm going to talk to you and I'm going to talk at you, but you can't talk back to me. Yes, they can. They can advocate for themselves in a respectful way, and it's okay. And so I think two big things is just we're not hiding, and children are just little people, right? They have a voice, and it's the educators and the people that are in the schools with them that are just helping to amplify that voice. We're not hushing anyone up, but the only way they can use their voice is if they know exactly what they're talking about and where they've come from.
Thank you very much.
I think one of the things that we do along those lines, we probably aren't faced with it as much in the face as your students are, Tyritia, but what we advise our parents that we do workshops for is to look at where your kids are getting their information, to make sure that it's a real source, a real credible source. And that's where you can begin the conversation with your kids and talk about what they're seeing in their lives. Military students are a diverse bunch as well, but they have some advantages, and so they're not pressed as much in the face with what's happening in the country. But when it does come up, what we ask our parents to do is to look at the source of the information and go from there.
Bweikia?
Yeah, I think I learned as a teacher the importance of, I used to think when I first started teaching that little kids don't like pay attention. And I learned very quickly that was not the case, that our young children are watching, they're taking everything in and they're listening. So it's very important that we make sure that our teacher candidates are aware of what's happening, what are the current events, because I think oftentimes, like I said, we think, oh, pre-K, they're not going to talk about what's happening nowadays. But even as young as pre-K, they will come and say, you know, we just protested last night. My mom and I went and protested. So we try to make sure that they're up to date with current events, and that they have resources, and they start to talk about it in the classes.
No. Okay. Now, look, we got through all the way with no freezing.
Almost made it.
We almost made it, right? So look, her face. We need to take a picture of this.
Don't do that to her. Don't do that to her.
Right? But here's what I'd like you guys to do. Starting with Becky, please give us 30, 45 seconds of how you'd like to conclude this call. Let me personally say this has been an extremely knowledgeable panel. You guys have been fantastic. I've been getting feedback on a personal level, like this was amazing. So thank you guys for being so strong. Thank you guys for being so fantastic. Becky, if you would, please give us a few closing statements and arguments. Thank you.
I'll be real quick here because I do want to leave time for the other folks. I intend to invite the other panelists to do podcasts with us at MCEC. And if you look in the chat box, you can see all of the resources that that Glenn has put out there, that the MCEC team has put out there while I've been online. Because military child is in our name does not mean that our resources won't work for civilian kids. So
I appreciate it. Becky, thank you so very much. Bweikia, we caught you like this. So it's okay. I told him to take screenshots so we could, put it out on, Facebook.
So I could be like,
hey. Right. So what I asked everybody is give us your closing remarks. Tell us something you'd love to leave with the audience and the panel.
I think that on the higher ed, can you hear me?
Yes, 30, 45 seconds.
On the higher ed end, I want everyone to know that we are working tirelessly to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our teacher candidates.
Well, we appreciate that. Tyritia, and then Glenn, I'm going to make you last but not least today.
I think for all the parents out there, patience. You know, your kids are going to act different with you than they are going to act in school because they know you and you know them. And so just have patience. We know it's tough. But I also, like I said before, advocate for your children. Reach out to your teachers and the schools while it's still a campfire, I'll say. Don't wait for the whole forest to burn down to call your teacher, right? So if you need help and assistance, just communication, love them, and patience.
Glenn, you are closing us up.
Yeah, no, I'll pick up where Tyritia, this is a marathon, not a sprint. That's really critical to remember. Kids love to learn anything, especially the younger kids. And when in doubt, read. That's I'll leave it at that. And start with relationships, and you should be. We'll get through this together.
Well, on behalf of Eastern Seals, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, I'd love to personally thank each of the panelists for joining us today. I can't tell you, this was, informative for me on a personal level and a professional level. Remember that this is going to be shared. Of course, here at Eastern Seals, we're a nonprofit, so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask for any of you that have participated, please feel free to take a look at our website, eastseals.org, and donate. We are going to continue to do these kind of panel discussions for you. And again, we put eastseals.org in the chat box. We're going to continue to do these panels. We've had tremendous success, not only in the live version, but in the shared version. Please take this, share it to your friend set, to your work colleagues. And if you're an educator, I think this was probably one of our better important topics. Glenn, Dr. Porter, Dr. Steen, and Miss Tyritia Groves, thank you so very much. I bid you adieu. Thank you guys for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for the privilege.
Thank you.